Hey, Mr. Witherow here. Today we're going to talk about solving quadratics. All right, so lately we've been factoring, right? And so we talked about factoring. So if we give a quadratic equation here, or really just a quadratic for right now, and we have x squared plus 7x plus 12. All right, so far this is all we've been. So we asked ourselves, what two numbers do we multiply to get 12, right? That add to 7, which is 3 and 4, right? So x plus 3, x plus 4. And we would be done. But now with the word solving here, solving would indicate that we have to have an equal sign. And then it has to equal something. In this case, it's going to be equal to 0. So what we want is that we want to find out that what two things here, what will x be to make this 0 when we multiply together and come up with 0. So we have to remember the zero property rule here, right? And that just means that if we have a times b is equal to 0, right? So two things multiply together that give us 0 means that either a is 0 or b is 0, which means that we're just going to have to separate these things. Right? That's what we're going to do here. So when we have our two factors that are equal to 0, that means one factor has to be 0. So we're just going to simply just add or set these two things equal to 0. And then we're going to solve for x, which means that we would subtract 3 and we would get x is negative 3. We would subtract 4 and we would get x is negative 4. So our answer, our solutions are negative 3 and negative 4. Those two numbers, negative 3 and negative 4, when substituted in for x, one at a time, would make this 0. That's what we're looking for. So nothing terribly new except for this little part down here. Remember that when we have two things multiplied together that give us 0, that means one of them has to be 0. So if the problem is set up right here like this already, then we simply just factor and we go. Sometimes they don't set up the equation that way. Sometimes we have to make sure that it's set up that way. And what I mean by that is if we have x squared minus 10 is equal to 9x. Right? X squared minus 10 is equal to 9x. So the very first thing you have to do is you have to set, you have to get one side to 0. Okay? So get one side. So here we're going to get one side to 0. All right? So we're going to get one. And I would be willing to say to you and tell you is to keep the x squared term positive. All right, so make sure that that is positive. So we always want to keep this x squared positive. So you don't want to move the x squared to this side because then it would be minus x squared or negative x squared. So you don't want to do that. All right, so that means that I'm going to take this 9x and I'm going to subtract 9x from both sides. Now you notice that there is no other x term here. So that means I get to write all three of these down. So this becomes x squared minus 9x minus the 10 is equal to 0. Notice that when we move it over, we don't get just to squish all this together. Remember, like terms, that since there's not another term that looks like negative 9x here, that means we just have to write it here. And also remember standard form. Standard form says x squared, x, and then the constant, right? Downhill, 2, 1, and then 0. So now that we have the quadratic just means x squared. We have the trinomial here. Now we can go. So what two factors of negative 10 will give us negative 9? Well, that would be x minus 10 and x plus 1. Negative 10 times positive 1 is negative 10. Negative 10 plus 1 is negative 9. So then we would set up and we would go. So we would say x minus 10 is equal to 0, x plus 1 equals 0. Now, some of you out there will be able to see that you don't have to do this little step here. you can just do the opposite of it here. This would be x equals 10, and this would be x equals -1, because -1 plus 1 is 0, and 10 minus 10 is 0. All right, so that's all we can do for right now. There are some other ways we're going to do this, but we'll talk about those in another video. All right, keep working hard.